everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Just a Set Conversation. Jared Sandler welcoming you in if you're here for the first time. If you're back for more, appreciate the loyalty. Here, we're going to chat with Travis Heim for episode 69. Travis, of course, of Heim BBQ. They just opened another location in Dallas, starting, well, I guess not really starting in Fort Worth, starting well before that, but the first real storefront in Fort Worth. And Travis is one of the best pitmasters in the country. Again, the man behind the legendary Heim BBQ, along with his better half, Emma, and had a great chance to chat with Travis about his love for food, how that all developed, the first steps towards Heim BBQ, taking some big risks, and more. Really hope you get a chance to hear Travis talk about his journey. As always, would really appreciate if you would consider subscribing or liking, or maybe even just taking the link and sharing it with some friends. It all would be much appreciated. Alas, here it is, episode 69 of the Just a Set Conversation with Travis Heim. All right, Travis, so I think I read that perhaps mom and grandmother were pretty influential in helping you develop maybe a love or a passion for food. What more can you share about how food became more than just something you put in your body to give you fuel, but something that was even before it became your profession and your calling, just something that you knew you had maybe a greater interest in than the average person?
Yeah, I guess that wasn't something I realized until, later in life, and specifically like going over to friends' houses, or stuff, and trying, their parents' food, and it's like, wow, this kind of sucks. It's like, my mom was a really great cook, and my grandmother and even my great grandmother would bake, and they have all these recipes and stuff where it's like for biscuits, it's 2 handfuls of this, 1 handful of this, type of thing. And just really, kind of talented, home cooks. And so I grew up around it, and I didn't really think that much about it, and kind of similar to barbecue. But, yeah, once you get older, and then now with what we do and our restaurants and everything, you see like there's so much technique and all of this stuff that my mother and my grandmother didn't even know that they were doing, but it's just, family recipes that have been passed down and stuff. So I've been very blessed with that for sure.
What were your other interests growing up? What, if you think back in your childhood, what are the things that maybe stand out most to you about interests, hobbies, personality, whatever it might be?
Yeah, I was mainly interested in sports, I guess, like a lot of kids. And so I played pretty much every sport there was, and really cooking, and specifically cooking barbecue, wasn't a huge deal for me until kind of high school. I think the first brisket I ever cooked, I was like 12, and it was kind of just wanting to emulate my grandfather because he would cook a lot of barbecue. And so my main interests were, sports and music and, girls. That was probably it.
Okay, so when you, I guess you talked about familiarizing yourself with food, and maybe without even realizing it, developing an interest. When did barbecue come into the picture? When did that become maybe something that was of more interest to you than other cuisines and other culinary tastes?
Yeah, I think I guess I'm from Fort Worth, Texas, born and raised. Obviously, we still live here now, and I was just around it a lot, and we would always go to the Angelo's and Railhead, the old school places, and just kind of grew up with that. And then my grandfather would cook ribs all the time and cook different stuff. And then my father's family, he was from Marshall, Texas, and East Texas, and my uncle would build smokers, and they have this whole history of cooking barbecue and all this stuff. And so, not professionally, but I think again, it was one of those things where I was just around it so much that I didn't really, pick up on it until later. But around the time I was 12, 13, I started cooking really just because I was like, wanted to emulate my granddad and, thought he was cool. And anytime we had a family get together or something, he would cook ribs or, something on the smoker. And so that was kind of how it started. And then my mother had a small catering business just for, a handful of clients kind of on the west side of Fort Worth. And so too, in high school, college, I would help her as much as I could. So she would, do smoked tenderloin or, different stuff. And kind of helped her with that and got more interested in, the science of everything and how smoking works. And this was before barbecue was popular, is another thing. It's like I was just a nerd who thought it was cool and trying out different stuff and making notes of all my cooks. And, once we got into, college age, then my buddies and I would save up money for a rack of ribs or, brisket or something and a 30-pack of beer on the weekends. And, kind of do that. And it just kind of snowballed from there into, an obsession, I guess, of sorts. And two, around that kind of college age, I guess, when did I graduate? This is like, 13 years ago or something, was sort of this boom of a lot of new guys like Aaron Franklin and Austin and guys that were doing barbecue that I knew and loved and grew up with, but, we're doing these new techniques and this new stuff. And so then it kind of hit right in stride with what I was, interested in. And then that just snowballed into, trying to test out different recipes, do all this stuff and, whatever. So I feel like I got the bug early, and then it just kind of built from there.
Just curious, when you left for college, did you leave with an idea of like, I want to be this, like I want to go to college so I can do this, not necessarily what you're doing now, but, business or politics or whatever? Like, did you have a specific goal or target when you left for college?
Man, that's a great question. So not really. I played baseball in high school and football and other stuff, but I was probably the best at baseball, which isn't saying much. And we went to my wife and I now went to school, UT Tyler in East Texas. It was the Division III, and they didn't give scholarships, but it was like you could walk on and try that. So that was sort of my goal, is like maybe try to do baseball something in that capacity. But the day after I graduated high school, I moved to Nairobi, Kenya, and did about a 3-month missionary type thing there. And over that summer, I lost about 40 pounds. I was like a good 160, muscle, and lost about 40 pounds.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I couldn't hit a ball out of the infield when I got back. So then, at that point, it was kind of like, well, I guess I'll try something else. But
what was that? Okay, so I had no idea about the Kenya stuff. Oh, I mean, it's not often you get to just go to Africa and go to Kenya, and maybe you'll never go back there again. I don't know. Even if you enjoyed it, it's just it's tough to get to those places. What were some of your takeaways from your time in Kenya?
Man, great question. It was a life-changing experience, in a million different ways. And two, I graduated high school, and then the next morning was on a plane because I was already late to the whatever orientation thing, and then went over. And so we had a small group of a guy from University of Florida that had been there a couple times, and we worked with a church in Kibera, which at the time was the second largest slum in Africa. And it was basically like three big hills, a square mile, and there was, I think, a little over a million people living in this area. And so it's just, as terrible as you could imagine. But we went there, and they kind of helped rebuild these classrooms that they had at the church and the school. There was some AIDS outreach that they did, and they'd have groups of doctors that would come in. So we basically facilitate them from, arriving to, working and everything, and make sure nothing bad happened, which is completely idiotic that an 18-year-old is like, hey, welcome to Kenya. I've been here a week, and let me show you around, type of thing. But it was really life-changing. And when I got back, it was kind of a lot of culture shock. And I think, too, at that point, if I had anything in mind for a career, it was to be a pastor or a preacher, kind of do something like that in some way. And, really gave me a lot of perspective just on life in general. And one of my favorite memories was July 4th when we were there, and we had some group, I think, from like Tennessee, and we got a little tiny charcoal grill, and where we were staying was at a monastery with all these Kenyan nuns who were hilarious, and we cooked burgers for everybody. And so we had this little just piece of crap charcoal grill, and we're cooking burgers for like 50 people, and they didn't understand what we were doing or anything, but it was a lot of fun.
All right, so I want to go back to the barbecue journey. Obviously, really, if you want the true origin story, I guess it starts with some of the stuff we talked about and being in the kitchen at a young age. But when was the first step that you recall that was actually a move, whether you realized it or not, but a move towards what you're doing now? Like, what was that first actual, whether it was a job or a gig, or just, maybe it was with your buddies and saving up that money and preparing the food, but what would you kind of identify as that first step?
Yeah, when I guess the thing that I most remember was, I cooked barbecue for family and everything, to the point of like, everyone's like, we don't need barbecue again. You know what I mean? Like, let's order pizza or something. We don't you don't always have to cook ribs or whatever for an event. And so at this point, we had been married just a little bit, and my in-laws bought me a little Smoky Mountain, like Weber, little smoker. And it was the first kind of real smoker I guess I had. And there's these lunches at the church that we were going to, and they nobody would go because they were terrible. It's like tuna salad sandwiches or whatever. And the lady that did them, I was like, hey, do you mind if I bring a brisket or something? And she was ecstatic about it. And so I think I cooked like 2 briskets and brought them up to this deal. And this old guy at the church came up to me after and was like, who cooked those briskets? Did you cook that? And I was like, yes, sir. Like, is everything okay? He's like, that's the best brisket I ever had. And so it was this weird moment of like the first time someone outside of my family, was like, hey, this is really good. And, I like, kind of affirm that. And so I was like, oh, my family's not just lying to me. I guess I'm actually decent at this. So that really kind of lit a spark. And we did that, a few times. And then that sort of started our pop-up dinners, which weren't really even a pop-up, back then. But we basically, I got a smoker from my uncle in East Texas, and we just throw a big party. And we called it T&E Meat Club. And it was like supposed to be this underground, barbecue thing. You got to know somebody to come type of deal. And we'd have somebody playing a guitar. We'd have, cold beer, and, just throw $20 in a hat or whatever, and we'll, figure it out. And so that was kind of the first, I guess, commercial sort of thing of that. But it was definitely sparked by, other folks trying my food. And I was like, oh, this this is great. I like this,
So, okay, I want to know more about T&E Meat Club because I read about T&E Meat Club and
Yeah.
I promise people this is actually, I mean, it could maybe come off as an innuendo. This is actually a food a food experience,
Yeah.
nothing else. But what can you share with me about T&E Meat Club?
Yeah, it's good to give it that disclaimer for sure. So we it kind of started off of that, and just this idea of I got a smoker from my uncle Roger, who was in Marshall, Texas, and he was a welder, but he was also like a better beer drinker, that kind of guy. And so I was trying to get a hold of him for maybe 6 months, and he had these awesome smokers, now that people would spend, 10, 20 grand to buy. He, would just weld them, just him and his buddies, and they had these on trailers. And so he had one that I knew was sitting around, and I finally got a hold of him, and I was like, I have $300 to my name, but I was like, I will give you $300 and then do a payment plan or what, that just, if there's any way I could get this smoker, I'd love to, to figure out a way to make this. This was like 7 or 8 years ago, I guess. And he just said, come pick it up. And so we had a 99 Honda Civic at the time. So my wife and I rented a U-Haul truck and a trailer and somehow drug this thing out of the mud and brought it back to my brother-in-law's house. And it was this massive, it's not as big as the smokers we have now for the restaurant, but just way too big for a family to cook on. And so it's like, how can I use this and, get better and try new stuff without just, spending a fortune and wood and everything else. And so it was kind of all of those things together of like, let's just throw a party and we'll see if anybody shows up. And, it sort of started from that. And so we called it Meat Club, and it was real sort of family and friends and stuff and real low key. And then we did a couple, and then we did like a ticketed thing. And then so it became like, okay, we're going to have 30 people, let's sell tickets. And then we can use that money for food and for, beer and everything else. And so I was working security at the time in Fort Worth and for an oil company, and just absolutely miserable. And so I'd work like, 40, 50 hours a week.
Well, when you say security, Travis, are you talking like, you're standing big and strong and like, kind of imposing, like that type of security or other type of security? Just so I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if how imposing I was, necessarily.
But that was the goal.
Yeah, it was like, I was just doing that. When we moved back to Fort Worth, I was working at a restaurant, and I got this job, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great, and we'll have benefits or whatever, and it just, sucked the soul out of me. It was, whatever, but it got us to where we are. And so as soon as I'd get off work on Friday, I'd basically start cooking, and then we'd have the party Saturday night. And so, sometimes it was like, 36 hours without sleep or whatever, just to try to do this. But it was always, just an absolute blast and so much fun. And so the bacon burn-ins that we're kind of, known
Famous,
for,
yeah.
our potato salad even. I mean, a ton of our recipes started at the meat clubs, and it was kind of just this thing of like, well, let's try this out and, see if it's any good. And, it turned into a lot of the stuff on our recipes, a lot of my wife's recipes with the potato salad, pinto beans, that type of stuff. So pretty crazy.
Well, Travis, I think when you, in understanding your story, some people, and not that there's anything wrong with this, but some people come from a family that's got all sorts of financial resources, and it maybe makes it a lot easier to take a risk, because if it fails, mom and dad or whomever, they're in a position to support you. And that's great. I think we'd all, I don't have kids, but one day I'd certainly love to, you know, maybe certainly not spoil my kids, but give them maybe a freedom to go and try something. But I know that that's not a part of your story. That your risks were that they were risks. What were some of the, I guess, those moments where you're like, holy smokes, I'm kind of jumping off a cliff here, and I hope that I land cleanly. What were some of those risks that you think were essential, scary, but essential for you to get to where you are?
Yeah. We always, with my wife and I, we're really blessed with great parents who have 100% supported us and, along the way. And it's been huge, with everything, but, not, not necessarily in a financial way. And so like I get asked to do like, tell me, business class at TCU or whatever. And it's like, the key to opening a restaurant is to have a really rich relative. Like, I think that's probably the best way to go about it, because that's the opposite sort of what we did. And so, when we started out, we were doing these meat clubs, and I was working this job, and I had met some guys just through the barbecue world, John Lewis, who was at Franklin Barbecue, then La Barbecue, and Aaron Franklin, a bunch of these other guys. And I got to cook with them and different stuff. And so like we were spending all of our money on rental cars to drive to Austin and Houston on the weekends to do stuff. And just, really, in hindsight, it was smart, and I'm glad that we did it, but just kind of, crazy. And then I got laid off from my job after this one project was over. And so it was like sort of this thing of like, okay, I'm sure my wife is completely annoyed with all I talk about is barbecue, wanting to open a barbecue place, like all this. And so she was like, really encouraging of like, well, let's just, figure it out. And so I, went to Austin and cooked a little bit, and then we were like, we don't really want to move to Austin necessarily, away from family and everything. And we found, I was looking for a propane tank on Craigslist to buy so that I could weld it into a new smoker. So our meat clubs were getting so popular, we needed, more smoker space. And then I found a food truck for lease at a bar, a dive bar in Southside Fort Worth. And so I messaged the guy because I was like, this is too good to be true. It's just exactly sort of what I was looking for, and met with them, and, he was interested in having a barbecue thing there. And so my in-laws bought a trailer for us to put our smoker on. And so we literally pulled our trailer, smoker, up to the food truck. And I think the deposit was like, $1,300 or something, like, not a big deal. And that was literally all of the money we had. Like all of our savings, everything we had, we spent on the deposit. And then whatever was left over, we had paid for meat for the first day. And I think I cooked 2 briskets and some other stuff the first day. And when we opened the doors, we literally had $100 to our name. And it was one of these things where, I remember my wife was working in oil and gas, and we had signed the lease, and I was getting cold feet, and I called her. She was in Midland, and I was like, this is a terrible idea. Like, if this doesn't work out, we're going to have to, like, go live with your parents. And, this is just everything that could go wrong, type of deal. And just, you have those doubts and stuff. And she was like, let's do it. It's your dream, let's follow it, and really super encouraging. And there's still people to this day that I, came that first day we were open, and was like, if you guys hadn't showed up, we probably wouldn't be open right now. Like, it was one of those things. Like, our margin was so thin, and that's sort of how we started, was just okay, now we got a little money, and so we can cook a little bit more and then added another smoker and build from there. But I tell people from a business perspective, this is the absolute worst way to start a business. Like, we are very lucky, blessed, whatever you want to call it, to be where we're at. And it's definitely a lot smarter to have more than $100 startup cash when you open a restaurant.
But it's not as good of a story.
Yeah, I guess.
Hey, Travis, so I'm curious, you talked about the burnt ends and you got the Heim burger and you can always have a menu that replicates every other restaurant that fits maybe your genre, but how do you approach the opportunity to find creativity and to separate yourself? Because I do think while there are a lot of great restaurants that maybe their menu blends in and it's just the food that stands out, I think with Heim, you guys, the food is obviously exceptional. You don't survive if it isn't. But then you also have those things that are true to you. And I'm just curious how you go about that creativity process.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks. I think part of it, when you look at the history of Texas barbecue, I guess in general, I think of places like Louis Miller and Taylor, Kreitz Market, all these places that have been around 100 years, if not more. And, they're great and, what they are. And a lot of those, you're tied almost to tradition. And so it's like, this is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. And that's kind of the end of the story. And I think for us, it's kind of a blessing, like not coming from a family of barbecue or whatever, and being able to look at it and, look at guys like Aaron Franklin who are like, I'm going to do my best version of this thing, whether it's brisket or pork ribs or sausage or whatever. But, we can be creative with our technique and how we do things. We can be creative with the ingredients and the meats that we source and really kind of, approach it from all angles from that. And so for us, it was like, this is just, what we do. Like, I want to have the best brisket. I want to have, the best coleslaw. If we put it on the menu, I want it to be the best version of that thing that we can make. Otherwise, it's not going to go on the menu. So things like, the bacon burn ends, that was something where it was really just this thing of like, burn ends are famous in Kansas City. And so like what they'll do is take a brisket and you have the lean end, the fatty end, kind of like halfway through. They'll cut the fatty end off and then cube it, put some more sauce on it, rub, whatever, throw it back in the smoker. And so it's kind of these little like, chunks of brisket with, sweet and fatty and smoky. And they're really good, but, you do that in Texas and they'll throw you out of the state. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't do that to a brisket. So it was sort of my idea of like, well, what if we did that kind of burn-in, deal, but we did it with a slab of smoked bacon. And so took that and kind of ran with it. And, that was, now it's a huge thing. And then even somebody sent me a thing the other day that Kreitz Market in Lockhart is doing bacon burn-ins, pork belly burn-ins. So now you even have those places that are the sort of old school traditional kind of doing approach, new stuff. And like with our burger and, our potato skins, all of this kind of stuff was like, a lot of it comes from, we want to have as little waste as possible. And so like with our baked potato salad that we do that, is awesome, my wife's recipe, we were peeling potatoes and I walked in the kitchen one day and there was two trash bags, like huge trash bags full of potato skins from peeling the potatoes. I was like, there's got to be something we can do with this. Like, we're just throwing this away. And so that sparked the idea of like, okay, well, we'll just fry them and turn them into chips basically, and then put our mac and cheese sauce over it, throw some chopped brisket, pico, all this stuff on it. And then that's like our number one selling, appetizer thing. It's just pile of potato skins with cheese and everything on it. So, trying to be creative from, the standpoint of like, is this something that people are going to like? Is this something that, can help us, instead of throwing it away or something like that? But too, at the end of the day, I'm very particular about, like with our burger, I think we tested it for about 6 months before we put it on the menu. And I'm annoying all of our managers and everybody like in the company, but it's like, you guys don't understand, like this has got to be, perfect, as good as we can do it. And then you can go from there. But yeah, I don't know if that answered the question.
No, absolutely. I'm curious, you've mentioned other pitmasters, and I don't know. I'm definitely speaking out of turn and making this this observation because I don't live in this world, but it seems like in general there's a lot of camaraderie within the food community, the culinary community, chef to chef, and I'm sure there are some chefs who don't like others and rivalries and that stuff. But and maybe I'm wrong here, but it definitely seems like that camaraderie and that bond is a little tighter in your specific part of that food equation. The relationships that are shared and the appreciation that is shared. It's almost like different breweries. I always see breweries supporting breweries, even though you think, oh, they compete. But I also see barbecue joints support barbecue joints and Pitmasters support Pitmasters. I don't know. Am I off on that? And what's that relationship kind of like?
No, I mean, I think it's huge. And, I think especially, for guys like me, like we were really, from a timing standpoint, really kind of at the start of the curve with all this craft barbecue and stuff. And so, I hope people like myself and stuff, I have a ton of reverence for those guys that, like Wayne Miller and Taylor and Matt Louis Miller and, these other guys, Tootsie, who's like 90 years old at Snow's Barbecue, all these people that have been doing it forever and really, obviously I bring up Aaron Franklin a lot, but he was a huge influence on me. And, just seeing like, okay, we can do it. Like those guys are bringing a level of just, dedication and everything to this craft of what they do. And you have to have a ton of respect for that. And so I think too, now, it's like in Fort Worth, there's a new barbecue place opening every day. It seems like it's like, just this craziness. But I think you see where, you're like, oh man, I remember when we were going through that, or, I remember, being in the food truck days, or, other friends that have multiple restaurants like us and stuff. And so there's a great deal of empathy and, like you said, camaraderie of like, we're all in it together. And then especially now, 2020 with COVID and everything going on, it's like, you're just trying to survive, and we're like talking with, friends in Houston that have a place that's just really been, struggling and everybody's struggling. But, I think when you see people that are doing things the right way, you just naturally, you're like, I want to root for them, whether they're in Austin or down the street from us. It's just, there is something to that for sure.
All right, a few quick hitters, Travis, and we'll let you go. The casual barbecuer, what advice do you have to just your average Joe or Jill who wants to take a shot on a Saturday or Sunday and cook something up for friends or fam?
Great question. I get this a lot. I think, I think the key to great barbecue, no matter what, is having a really good fire. And so like your fire management. So, how much smoke you're getting on the meat, how much oxygen you're getting to the fire, making sure that you're burning a really hot, clean fire for anything is going to be key, because if you've had barbecue before where it's over smoked and you're like kind of burping it, for hours, it's like there's so many things that can go wrong just based off of that. And you don't want to just throw a bunch of logs on a fire and kind of walk away from it. And so I'd say that's key. And, with these Traeger grills and a bunch of this new stuff, you can kind of better manage that aspect of it. And then I would say that probably, 1A, 1B would be just making sure you make a schedule. It's a very simple thing, but if you're cooking a brisket and you're having a party and, you and your significant other are hosting people or whatever, the last thing you want to do is have them wait, 3 hours because your brisket's not done cooking or something like that. So, I was always just very neurotic of taking notes every time I cooked and okay, what's the weather like? What's the temperature like? How long did the steak? What did, rub did I put on, all this stuff? And, if you go from there, then I think that's where you get better a lot quicker and keeping all that. That wasn't a quick answer.
Listen, I think that might be to some people the most important answer, throughout that conversation is we got all these amateur barbecuers trying to cook up some 5-star meals. Where's the craziest place you've gone specifically to have some barbecue?
The craziest place I've gone,
or most out there, or whatever, just most off the beaten path.
Man, so that's a good question. We, especially in college, this was before even Yelp or whatever, but we would try to search out these little barbecue shacks in Tyler, East Texas. There's one everywhere, and so there's a place, and I forget the name of it, but it was on the way to the beer store. Tyler's was a dry county, so there's this little shack, and it was in front of a guy's house, and on the way to the beer store, and we stopped in for ribs, and it was terrible, but it was just such a cool little thing of this guy. I guess one day was I'll just put a shed in the front yard and and start cooking barbecue.
All right. And then last question, what is your favorite non-barbecue meal? And I'm sure that it's like a lot of things, people probably think you have barbecue morning, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm sure that's not the case. What's your favorite non-barbecue meal?
Ooh, yeah, that's kind of a misnomer too of people just assume you eat barbecue every day. It's I couldn't do that. I would be 500 pounds if I did that. And, I think I'd probably have to say Tex-Mex. Growing up in Fort Worth, we have a million just awesome Tex-Mex kind of Mexican restaurants, and I could eat that once a week, if not more. So that's probably my go-to.
Well, there you go. Episode 69 of the Just a Set conversation with Travis Heim. Really had a nice chat with Travis. Hope you enjoyed it. As always, a special thanks to Zach Rowe for producing. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. We got more coming up here on the channel later on this week. So be sure to be on the lookout as always. I'd appreciate if you would subscribe, comment, or just share the link with someone who you think might enjoy this conversation. Until next time, stay safe, be healthy. Talk to you later.